AI is not going to go away. AI is going to remain a task accelerant in everything you do. So learn it, get in front of that, get on the wave, as I like to say. I think I've spent, and so many other people have spent an entire career surfing, technology waves. So get on the wave, surf the wave for sure, but learn how you can use it to get yourself accelerated methodology that is high quality.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Simply Offensive. Today I'm joined by Joff Thyer. I got to meet Joff. I'd seen him at several conferences, but I think we probably spoke for the first time at ColonelCon recently in Omaha, Nebraska. So it was great to get to meet him. I've been a big fan of his work over the years and seeing all the conference presentations and the courses and stuff he's offered over the years. So it's great to finally get to sit down and discuss all this with him. Welcome to the show.
All right. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, it's good to be here. It was definitely great to see you at ColonelCon, one of my favorite cons of the year, actually. The guys out there do a really good job running it. Yeah, it's just a fun time. I don't have a reason to go to Omaha otherwise, but I try to teach there every year now, and it's been about, I think, three years, maybe even the fourth time. I'm not sure, but it's just a great little con. So I look forward to that. I try to find cons that are we can teach at and network and do the usual things.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I was sharing with some folks there that I think the Midwest has some of the best conferences.
Yeah, I've been hearing that there's a number of things that go on in the Midwest. CypherCon was another one that I keep hearing great things about. GurCon, I'm not sure whether that one's Midwest, but there's some here on the Eastern Seaboard too that are always fun. RVASEC is coming up in Richmond, Virginia. So then, of course, there's the whole B-Sides organization, so that you can always find a fun B-Sides to go to whenever you're feeling the mood. Yeah, it's interesting watching the community now that we sort of post-COVID days and people are coming out of that virtual, deep rabbit hole they were in, and training is changing because of that. We're sort of shifting more to a live format more often. And I think various people have various experiences, but I found we're not getting quite as much traction for virtual training if it's longer, if it's like a 1 or 2 day. The shorter events, like a 4-hour, are still like bite size, and people tend to like those. So that's a good thing. But yeah, I think things are shifting and changing. Of course, dare we mention the big word AI, because that's shifting and changing everything. Yeah.
So what class or workshop did you teach there at ColonelCon?
Yeah, so myself and Derek Banks, Derek, a colleague at Black Hills, we taught AI for cybersecurity professionals. We've worked on that for probably 2.5 years now. The course originally started as a sort of data science AI fundamentals entity, and then we slowly morphed it over time as it became apparent of the sort of widespread diverse applications of large language models emerged into our industry. And we started focusing and leaning more into methodology and how cybersecurity professionals can actually use LLMs to their advantage in their day-to-day work. And we do have a mix of stuff in there, methodology and usage in day-to-day work, but also we have some risks and threats associated with it. And we have a section in the course as well on attacking LLMs with a nice little fun CTF at the end. It's a good mix of stuff. I'd say it's sort of a survey of lots of things. It gives a little taste of a lot of little methodology nuggets that people can use in the cybersecurity industry. We've definitely enjoyed merging that and changing it over time. This year, I think we're probably, with the rate that things are moving, have substituted probably 60 to 70% of the content. I mean, it's, the minute you put something in a course about artificial intelligence, it's almost out of date the very next week right now, because things are shifting so quickly. So that keeps things, very, very interesting. But it also makes a lively kind of classroom experience when we teach live because people have a lot of feedback. Oh, hey, we're doing this. What do you think? Let's talk about that. And that's really cool too, because this is just explosive growth right now in all these different solutions that are employing LLMs for different methodologies. The fact that source code and production programming is effectively a solved problem is just accelerating the entire production of new entities and new ways to do things. I don't know. I'm kind of an old guy, but it's a fascinating time to be in the industry and watch this crazy growth curve that we're going through right now.
It is amazing. And you kind of mentioned how things change so quickly. And you just think before AI became about to really be a thing in cybersecurity, things kind of changed quickly, but not quite as quick as things are with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the big fear in the last few weeks here, of course, has been the compression of the timeline for vulnerability discovery to exploit development, and with all of the noise, some of it being a lot of public relations stunt, I believe, from Anthropic around the Mythos preview, right? But the reality is upon us. We absolutely have the acceleration effects of artificial intelligence in vulnerability discovery and in source code analysis. But the flip side of that is also true. We have artificial intelligence acceleration in defensive sides of information security as well. And people need to remember that sort of can balance things out a little bit. Things are just overall moving faster, right, on both sides of the equation. It becomes rather interesting. And I think there's a sort of chaotic element to it based on the fact that any large language model is A, simulated digital reasoning is the phrase I like to use, and B, non-deterministic in its nature or probabilistic, right? And so that means that this simulated digital human, if you like, is going to go off the rails and interesting things are going to happen. And that's a fundamental paradigm shift in our industry from deterministic algorithmic kind of controls that have been there that might have some vulnerabilities in them. Security solutions like SAST and DAST, they're always been deterministic in their nature because they're algorithmic by design. And now we're moving into this space where LLMs and agents are getting plugged into software, turning it into a non-deterministic kind of realm, which is, I think, let's just say an interesting space to move into. And I think it's going to continue getting more interesting as time goes on.
Yeah, it's been kind of interesting to see what AI has done in the hands of security professionals because, it's been around a lot longer than what we've really been using it, but just all of a sudden now you have this advanced tool that security professionals like yourself are figuring out how to leverage it. So it's been really cool to see what people are coming up with. Before we get too far along into the conversation, if you wouldn't mind sharing your origin story, kind of how you got started out up to what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. So I came from a long, grand history of an evolution that quite a lot of folks actually go through, and that is, I started out in the world as getting very, very interested in systems administration and what it means to be a sysadmin back in the day. And back in the day, I'm talking mid late 80s. So I remember the fun times of trying to stand up. I think it was Xenix at the time on a PC that maybe had a 10 megabyte hard drive, and you had to compile pieces from C and to get it running. It was interesting times. You definitely had to know what you were doing back in that time. No, I sort of moved forward and decided computer science was super interesting. This was the days of playing around with bulletin boards. I grew up in South Australia, so I was in Australia, connecting to various things with a 300 baud modem, trying to see what's on the other end and what would answer in the mid 80s. And myself and my brother spent all this time just sort of hacking around with things because it was very new and fun, and probably we were getting into all kinds of trouble. But anyway, that's really going back. And I got involved in doing a computer science degree back in the day, and I moved to the United States right around 1989 with a girlfriend of mine, and that didn't work out. But my wife is Carolina girl, who I ended up marrying actually in 1992, 93. Oh my God, she's going to kill me. Anyway. So that's how I ended up staying in these parts. But I had a long storied career in the academic space after finishing out some degrees while I was here in the States. And I worked for the University of North Carolina system for many, many years, building various systems. And the way I ended up sort of transitioning from systems administration into large network construction is there was this weird time back in, I think it was about 1998, 99, where Ethernet as we knew it really couldn't go over fiber optics very well. They hadn't made that transition into fiber optics yet. And so the only technology that existed at that time to actually cover distances greater than 1,500 feet, which was between buildings on a campus usually, was ATM-based technology, which the phone companies had developed, right? And this is OC3 stuff back in the day. So the university I was working at bought a solution to connect all the different campuses, and it was an OC3. It was a company called Newbridge, had an OC3 based solution, and it converted Ethernet packets into these OC3 packets, which are tiny little not OC3 ATM packets, tiny little 53 byte cells, right? And long story short, the reason I ended up sort of pivoting into networking is this thing had a Sun Solaris box attached to it, and it was the box that actually was making the routing decisions for all of the different VPCs that had to be nailed up for this traffic to go across the network. So I was doing sysadmin at the time, and they just sort of handed it to me. They said, "Here, Joff, you know Sun Solaris, do this now," right? Which is very classic academia back in the day. And they handed me that, and so suddenly I'm a network administrator. Well, that transitioned into putting in a whole bunch of Cisco gear early in the 2000s because they finally solved that Ethernet problem. And we went back to native Ethernet, which was a really good thing because let me tell you, that transition and all that packetizing of stuff, there were some protocols. People don't remember when we lived in a multi-protocol world. You probably remember this, Phil, but I was dealing with IPX and DECnet and LAT and IP and all this stuff. Well, all that packetizing was terrible on some of these protocols, and Digital Equipment was one of the worst. Love those guys, but that DECnet stuff was sensitive to any latency, and it would just break it completely across the network. So there's all kinds of really fun experiences I had back in those days. But then I ended up consulting not only in building out very large multi-layered networks, huge wireless installs beyond that, servicing, anywhere between 13,000, 20,000 students on a campus. And I really, got my chops back in those days with learning how to not only build these very, very large networks, but learning how to defend them, because students are actually, love students, but students do weird and wacky things on computer networks, as do faculty researchers too. We had to build these networks that would withstand all of that stuff. So we got heavily into control plane policing and all kinds of ACLs everywhere and all this. Like, I turned into a network infrastructure defense engineer ultimately through all of that. And then I did a whole bunch of wide area consulting across the state of North Carolina. There's about 300,000 or so subscribers to the research and educational network across the state. And then right around 2010, 11, security was becoming really very visible and a much bigger entity. And I had jumped into the SANS world and done a whole bunch of certifications and was having fun kind of following that path. And like all good careers go, the university world was trying to push me into middle management. And I don't know if anybody's ever worked, this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek pun, but if you've worked middle management in any government organization, let's just say it's rather painful. And that was not for me. So right around 2012, and I would have done this earlier, by the way, somewhere about 2008, we had that global economic crisis and everything fell off the cliff. So I just sort of hung on for dear life. But right around 2012, I started really networking with the community. And that's about the time DerbyCon came along, if you remember the DerbyCon days. And I started networking very, very heavily with some folks at DerbyCon. Got to meet, Dave and John Strand. And one of my early friends was Tim Tomes. Shout out to Tim, who I was working with. And those guys actually turned me onto a customer of theirs. I won't name him, but we did some sort of semi-classified work, and I was doing some software development stuff for him. And, I was looking to pivot out of that academic world, and I was throwing a resume around. And right about 2013, John Strand approached me and said, why don't you come on and work with Black Hills? So that was my pivot in that direction. I did a short stint with a Cisco reseller before that, but they really didn't do security services well. They were all about pushing the Cisco gear, and that really wasn't for me. So I came on with John, and when I came on in 2013 with Black Hills, we were 4 people, I think. And over the next decade, that grew to be in excess of 100 people, and just a crazy growth curve of tons and tons of penetration testing, which has been a fun ride. So that's a bit of the story of how I got involved. I am proud to say that I went to, I think, almost every DerbyCon that was held, except for I think I missed the very last one. So it was good to be part of that crowd as well, and part of the community. And also part of my story was, and sort of thanks to John and some of the folks in the community, is they introduced me to SANS and wanted me to start teaching with SANS if I could. And so I started working with the SANS organization in 2014. Initially started teaching a Python class, actually. And we did several years teaching on base with Army students mostly. And eventually, before the pandemic, I ended up teaching several years, mostly in Europe, for SANS, which was kind of a fun trip from a sightseeing perspective. As much as you could, you were working 6 days, so you could, you seeing mostly hotels and airports. But that was a really formative experience. I got to meet a lot of folks in the community during that period as well, and it was a whole lot of fun. And now I'm kind of slowing it down a little bit. That's a short snippet of the life of Joff there in the InfoSec and IT world in general. Everybody that's in InfoSec prior had an IT space somewhere if you're of a certain age, because cybersecurity or information security didn't really exist as a separate entity kind of until the thousands era, and people started to separate it out.
Yeah, it's kind of like anyone that would have been into security earlier would have had to have done it in the government or something, because they're really, like you said, didn't really exist. And I think for me, I'm kind of glad things worked out the way they did, because I would have missed a lot of foundational stuff if I could have jumped right into pen testing. But fortunately, I had spent 6 years as a system administrator and learned Windows NT, and was started out at Novell NetWares, got my CNE. And when you mentioned IPX, do you remember that product that Novell had? It was like Border Gateway, and it was like IPX, SPX up to a point, and then it was IP to the internet. So if, a threat actor was trying to come across, they had IPX, they're just kind of dead. There wasn't that routing between the internet and that server.
It was
Yeah.
really, really interesting times, right? And I remember the folks in our shop at the time, they held on to IPX as a protocol for a long time, because they're like, look, it's not internet addressable. And I had the fun experience when I was dividing up campus networks and subnetting them to have to actually subnet IPX as well, and run multi-protocol in a routed fashion in a campus network. And you never forget those experiences, right? So it was definitely a trial by fire kind of experience there, and very unmanaged, uncontrolled environments, which is kind of funny right now, because I've just been having recent conversations quite a lot about the acceleration of vulnerability discovery, and what, like all things in this world, what is old is new again. I've been advising some clients, it's like, you're going to have to get really good at rapid containment, because you're not going to be able to stay ahead of vulnerabilities. There will be exploits that come slower after the vulnerabilities, but it's going to happen. I just sort of had this immediate sort of nostalgic moment, because back in the days when the very early worms were coming out, especially when it was WinXP Service Pack 1, right before they put the firewall into Windows XP, we had a whole bunch of Windows XP boxes sitting on a publicly addressable network. Every one of them had a public IP. That's how universities roll, right? And still to this day, a lot of universities do roll. They're publicly routable. They don't believe in doing NAT and all those good things. Shout out to Marcus Ranum for inventing the NAT firewall, right? But, we had to contain some of those early worms by locking down routed interfaces on the campus to prevent spread. And it was like, wow, this is nostalgic, because people are going to get back into this mode of having to do rapid containment by isolation and segmentation and stuff. And it's all coming back again. So yeah, it's an interesting time we're in.
Yeah, that could be a good workshop for you, possibly.
It could be. It could be. I mean, The bigger, again, we're going to range all over the place here, but the bigger issue I see right now, especially with agentic AI and the software development that's going on around it, is frankly non-human identity management. That's a massive, massive problem right now. We in the cybersecurity industry have never really managed non-human identities very well, even before agentic AI came in. There were service principals that are been lying around networks for decades, and they'd have a 6-character password. And of course, that's hacker delight, right? Because if you find that, it's like usually it's domain admin and, go have a whole bunch of fun with it. When you multiply that into now a world where developers are jumping on agentic AI development and the agent needs privileges to do something, right? It's going to have to interact with an API of some sort or some sort of database or something like this, right? And so what are developers going to do? Well, they're just going to turn right around to these non-human identities that have been in the network for years, grab it and use it, right? And of course, the fallout and ramification of that is that entity is probably going to be overprivileged. It's going to be able to do things that it ought not to be able to do. And by the way, it's attached to an animal that's non-deterministic and can go in any old direction it wants to go to. So I don't think as cybersecurity professionals, we're going to be out of a job in anywhere near future, given all these chaotic things that are happening.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was kind of wanting to ask what your thoughts were on that, because, everyone's worried about AI replacing us. And then, you've got companies that are building tools to automate pen testing. And, for people that have done it, you kind of see it's a lot more harder to do than what you think. So what are your thoughts?
Look, I sort of divide it now. There's no doubt in the pen testing space, especially external to networks, that a lot of the work pen testers are doing on external network penetration tests is very routine, right? And they've got standard scanning methodologies. They're taking those scanning methodologies. They're looking through the findings. They're looking for opportunities, and it's very repetitive. That space, I think, is going to be very well automated with agentic AI solutions, and it probably should be. It's the low-hanging fruit that it's a grind. When you're a pen tester doing that, I mean, it is really a grind doing that work, and I don't think you should have to do that work. I think, the agentic AI solutions should be plugged into doing that work, and maybe you've got a little human in the loop to review some of the quality side of it, maybe really do some spot checks on some of the actual findings. But I think it's going to be a solved problem before long. When you're talking about internal to networks, especially if you get into spaces like OT environments, that's going to be a little more delicate, right? And it's going to take a little bit more work to get it right if we want to go in the automation direction. And there's a lot more potential for damage, I believe. So in that space, I can see AI solutions, agentic AI solutions, probably thriving at minimum from a reconnaissance perspective. Certainly, there'll be opportunities there. But when you go to step over that line to actually perform some exploit delivery and stuff, I think that people are going to be a little bit reticent to immediately jump to an AI solution. I think it's going to happen anyway. I just think it's a little bit more of a difficult challenge. And I think when you see some of the solutions out there, you are kind of seeing that split, right? External stuff, web app stuff, anything that's internet facing is going to be a pretty quickly solved problem, I think. But the other networking environments that are more heterogeneous and are more internal stuff going on, that's going to be a more tricky or sticky problem, if you like. So that's kind of where I'm sitting on it right now.
So what are your views if, say, someone was wanting to get into offensive security, do some sort of pen testing? Is there one area that you feel like is a little more future-proof, like application or AI pen testing? Do you feel like any of those areas would be kind of a better place to be in than just the traditional infrastructure pen testing?
Yeah, I don't know. Things are so up in the air right now. It's very difficult to see where it's going to land. I do think we're still firmly in kind of the hype cycle of AI. I don't think we've quite come over the peak yet. And it's, I've heard other people say, John Strand, for example, has said this on one of our podcasts in the past, a webcast in the past. It's very reminiscent of kind of the .com era and right before year 2000, right, where we had all this technology that was booming and like there were millionaires to be made. But we're sort of reminding ourselves of that era, and we're waiting for that period where it'll go bust. And part of the reason I say that is the unit cost economics around artificial intelligence are awful. The amount of money that's going into this is insane right now. And I don't know when that curve's going to flatten out and how that's going to look, but money's not infinite, and the economics will dictate some of this at some point. And I suspect, just like the dot-com era, we may see this boom and bust cycle before it settles out into a more mature solution kind of space. And we're just still up there on that hype cycle period right now. So it's very hard to see in the future where it's going to land. Now, I think I sort of went on a tangent. How would I advise somebody if I had a child or somebody that's about to go into a career and we're very, very interested in cybersecurity? I would tell them, keep that interest. The way to look at it is AI is not going to go away. AI is going to remain a task accelerant in everything you do. So learn it, get in front of that, get on the wave, as I like to say. I think I've spent, and so many other people have spent, an entire career surfing, technology waves, right? So get on the wave, surf the wave for sure, but learn how you can use it to get yourself accelerated methodology that is high quality, right? The other aspect that I'm really concerned about right now, and I think others have expressed this concern as well, those of us who have a lot of experience in the industry and a high degree of diverse background in the industry are really able to use artificial intelligence well. It's kind of one of those quality input in, quality input out scenarios, like a lot of things in technology have been over time. But those of us who have less experience and are just starting, trying to use these AI models to do things and not necessarily getting quality output out of the models because they just don't have the experience to prompt it, to tell it exactly what they want. So I'm afraid a little bit that we're going to lose the fundamentals. And I really hope that leadership in various companies start to reevaluate. What I'm seeing is a bit of an instinctive gut reaction just to lay off people in favor of AI, because AI is trained on data that's out there, that those fundamental skills are still important. AI can extrapolate based on the data and run its model inference to get a result, but it's not always correct. So it's scary to me. And I think we'll see it snap back a little bit at some point where people realize that having fundamentals is really important. But, in multiple industries right now, I think, in fact, my daughter told me the other day, she's in marketing and PR industry, that her company and others are just laying off interns and saying, we don't need those people anymore. Well, how are they going to get experience if they're doing that? So I just don't think we've seen the rubber band snap back yet. So I wouldn't discourage people from getting in there and learning this stuff. And I would even go as far as to say, don't lean into the models too much. Like, learn your fundamentals before you start going for the cheat code, because the AI models are about accelerating tasks once you have some knowledge, but you've got to gain that knowledge first. So I think that was a bit of a philosophical rant, but that's where I'm at. I'm disappointed in a lot of corporate leaders right now in that they're looking at AI as like this massive cost saving entity for them and disregarding the human aspect a little bit. I don't like that tendency, because I think it will backfire on us collectively in the industry if we keep heading down that path.
Yeah, that kind of scares me for people trying to break in, entry level jobs, and then just people maintaining jobs. Because one of the things I experienced, I used to work for a mortgage company, and we brought in these efficiency experts, and they evaluated every job within an organization. They laid off a bunch of mortgage processors and turned around and had to hire them back because there's things that they couldn't account for. And they tried to go this new route and it didn't work, and they had to hire people back. And that's kind of scary. Hopefully, if corporate world makes that mistake, they'll hire people back. But, it's just kind of bad for those that are affected by the layoffs.
Yeah. And that's why I would tell a younger version of myself, like, surf the tech wave again. Just get on the wave, understand the technology. I'll give you an example right now. I'm in the process of developing several pieces of software that I had shelved for a long time because I didn't have the time and energy to do it. These AI models are giving me the time and energy to bring creative ideas to life, but I'm using my experience and knowledge as part of that endeavor. That's where it's at. So you still have to gain the experience and knowledge. And if we disregard the humans going forward, you'll lose that aspect, and that would be the tragedy, right? I just hope that in the economic equation that we see a rebalancing, or even just almost a moral and ethical rebalancing and approach to it. And I don't think we're quite there yet. Again, we're still in that hype space, right?
Yeah, very interesting. So we're getting down towards the end of the episode. Is there anything you'd like to share that we didn't get to discuss?
No, not right now. I will say this much, a little hint at something that I've been stewing on in the last couple of weeks, and that's around the vulnerability management program concerns and AI models. I'm just going to, I would give everybody this piece of advice, and that is lean back into your vendors and ask them, are they going to incorporate AI analysis into the software development lifecycle of the products they're putting out? Because if they don't, we absolutely are going to be not in front of that vulnerability curve. And that's something that, it has to be a sea change, I think, that we're seeing in the industry. And if that happens and they lean into it and they introduce, true AppSec programs that have AI components plugged into it, I'll see us get back on and into a space where we can, stay ahead of the vulnerabilities a bit. But I'm very concerned, just ultimately summarizing around that, of the pressure that's occurring in the vulnerability management space, especially some of these programs like the NIST NVD and the CVE program with MITRE and CISA, and the pressure they're under with the explosion of vulnerabilities, and they're having to prioritize and change the program. And, it's a general concern that we're going to have to refocus on things in a different way. And I'm not sure if the answers truly emerged yet. But anyway, it's been something that's rolling around in my head in the last couple of weeks.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to join me today. It was good to learn more about you, and I really enjoyed our discussion.
Thanks, Phil. Great to be on the show. Hopefully I'll see you again.
Yeah, and we'll share in the show notes your LinkedIn so folks can connect with you and keep up with all the good stuff you're doing.
All right. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you in the next episode. Make sure to subscribe and share with your friends. And until next time, take care.